So by October of 2023, the conflict in Sudan that began in April that year had forced over 1.4 million people into 5 neighbouring countries, namely South Sudan, Ethiopia, Chad, Egypt and the Central African Republic. Over 6 million people were internally displaced within Sudan. A new UN Human Rights Office report describes numerous attacks between April and December 2023 by the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, including on locations housing displaced people, especially in the capital of Khartoum, in Kordofan and Darfur. We are now joined to discuss the development by Civicus Africa Lead, Paul Mulindwa. Mr. Mulindwa, sir, thank you very much for your time this morning. In a country that would appear impossible to live in, what do we know, rather, about how such reports are put together and the accuracy of the data that has been captured?
Yeah, thank you very much, Edu, for having me, and good morning to our viewers and listeners out there. Yes, indeed, this conflict has really ravaged the country Sudan, and we have to put this into the context that this war, although we say the conflict started in April last year, but we see some of the trends that came by before that, as one can remember the demonstrations and the tensions that erupted during the time of al-Bashir and that caused the deposed of al-Bashir from the presidency. This has culminated into, government of unity, whereby two factions between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces came together to form a government of unity. That in between then they could not agree on the tensions, and then the tensions erupted into the current conflict we see that has really ravaged the country. The report is really alarming. I mean, the facts and findings of the reports are alarming, and it is indeed very, very serious on the ground. This report is conducted by different actors in terms of gathering information, interviews. One would recall that UN offices has not been really closed, but as well as other civilians and other actors on the ground have been pushed out of the country due to the conflict, the UN staff have also been victims, have not been spared. But they still have some NGOs that are operating in Sudan. They still have some Sudanese human rights, UN human rights offices that are still operating. So this is how the information is collected, is collected and gathered to ensure that it is accurate and it is giving the right information.
Mr. Mulindwa, the report reads that some 303 victims and witnesses, including dozens conducted in Ethiopia and eastern Chad, as well as analysis of photographs, videos and satellite imagery and other open source information was used. And they have observed a pattern of ethnic-based attacks as well as the use of heavy sophisticated weaponry. What is this war about, to your understanding? Is it as simple as an ethnic conflict?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the war between these two sides that erupted in April last year was backed by international community and neighboring countries to plan to merge what was rapid support forces and the Sudanese armed forces together. And we, at the beginning, both were sharing, power after a long time, and they were together, working together to build the country after the deposed of Omar Bashir. But later, due to the transition plan that was brought in, then the two parties could not agree. And this is when the war begins. One, it was suggested that Rapid Support Forces was getting a lot of support, a lot of sympathies from outside countries, undermining the Sudanese armed forces. And then Sudanese armed forces felt that they are marginalized, they are losing power, and as such, they could not accept the transition plan. And then now the full-fledged war begins. Now, in terms of shifting the trends of this conflict, or what we can call this war, has been that now regions back different groupings, and these paramilitary groupings also come from local militias. So that's why now it takes a dynamic of ethnic cleansing, ethnic war perspectives. But in itself, it is a power struggle between the two countries. I mean, between the two factions in the country. Yeah.
Mr. Mulindwa, the report outlines that some of the violations are tantamount essentially to war crimes in Sudan, which is inflicted to people on the ground. The report details incidents of rape and not just displacement, right, including children, so this being used as a weapon of war. And so when you speak of outside elements or countries outside of the continent that have their hand in what we are seeing playing itself out in Sudan, how much of a responsibility should they shoulder for where the situation is?
Yeah, thanks very much, Dudu. Yes, the report details a lot of crimes that have been really committed. If we go to the region of Kordofan and see the reports that come there, if you look at Omdurman in Darfur, sexual assaults, sexual abuses, crimes against humanity, and war crimes that are being committed are really, really alarming. And in the words of UN commissioner who has been appointed to monitor the Sudan situation, everything from basic human rights to the economy and the legal system have been decimated by the ongoing war between the civil militaries. It indicates all sorts of violations. To the neighbors, as you mentioned, that the UN collects information from people who are already in Chad and Ethiopia. So this war has pushed over 8 million people in displaced, over 4 million refugees in different countries. So the neighboring countries, the responsibility here is to show a welcome to these refugees, to the people fleeing the conflict. There are some people whom we may call double refugees. For instance, they left Chad, they left Ethiopia, Somalia, to Sudan as refugees. Now they are being forced out. So for the neighboring countries, the responsibility here is to welcome back the people who are from these countries, but also to give a refuge to the Sudanese who are running away from the conflict. And then there is IGAD, which is a regional body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, that has been doing the mediation, that has been doing these diplomatic efforts to ensure that the conflict, the two parties resolve the tensions and conflict. So here as Civicus, as a membership organization that focuses on raising the voices of the people and protect and promote the human rights of the individuals, it is our appeal that the neighboring countries, IGAD as a bloc, to restrain from interfering in some of those initiatives that may be seen bipartisan, but also to call together the parties so that they come back to the table, since they have already developed some tensions, even abandoning the mediation that has been going on.
And that leads to the next question. How much responsibility should a body like the African Union, or you speak of IGAD, other countries on the continent, how much responsibility should they shoulder? Because there's this concept, and that's the question to you, Mr. Mulindwa, is when is silence being complicit, right? And you look that up, and silence is, compliance rather. When is silence compliance? And when you look that phrase up, it says to not become desensitized to injustice or make it the norm. And so have we been desensitized to justice when it comes to the African continent, that we can turn our backs on what is happening right here at home as some parts of the continent burn instead of build? What allows for that in 2024?
Actually, there has not been silence as per se by these blocs. Since the conflict began, the IGAD has been on the ground, has been, trying to bring together the two factions and all the stakeholders. And indeed, in December, we saw reports that indicated that both parties were happy and agreeing towards a sustainable solution. Now, the funny thing, for the lack of better word, that comes through is what we see in January. When the two parties, when the IGAD had a summit in Kampala, and then the RSF, one of the factions, was invited to attend the party, and then the military, the national military, thought that this was sort of legitimizing the paramilitary forces and withdrew from the bloc. So, and this is where now the issue of sensitivity comes in. When do we bring the two parties on board? When do we legitimize others? On the other hand, we see AU also established the high-level panel to fact-finding mission in Sudan to find out the stakes, what are the stakes, and how can the African Union get involved? One would want to give the benefit of the doubt that perhaps AU did not want to climb over IGAD's initiative and mandate as a regional bloc that was already doing something good and something that was really getting to the focused direction. So I can say that there was no silence here, there was no complicity, only that the situations turned all of a sudden in January and February, and we see now what has been called for, ceasefire, is no longer in the context, and fighting has completely begun. But has restarted. But what we can ask as actors, as stakeholders, on the basis of human rights, on the basis of human dignity for all Sudanese, is for these regional blocs to rethink, to reorganize, and re-engage the parties, because withdrawing from the parties is not the solution. Okay. The parties themselves can withdraw, the RISF and the national military can withdraw, but the people on the ground are suffering. We've seen, in the view of suffocating voices that advocate for peace and respect for human rights, state agencies have come up with repression policies, including increasing fees for registration of civil society organizations from $3,500 US to $4,500. Journalists are being mugged, and civil society actors being imprisoned and detained. So our call is to ensure that these neighboring countries, a regional bloc, AU, rethink, re-strategize, and bring back the two factions on the drawing board to restart the negotiations.
Mr. Mulindwa, sir, thank you very much for your time. Paul Mulindwa.